Shall we start or no?
Good morning, everyone. I wanted to say thank you on behalf of the Social Science Department for attending this first lecture in our Black History Month Symposium this week. We have a whole week full of opportunities. Hopefully you've been able to take a look at the flyers that are out there. If you have any questions about opportunities that are available this week, you can see me after the lecture. That would be fine. This afternoon, just to give you a heads up, from 1 to 3 in this room, if you're into jazz music, we have a group coming in called the Langston Hughes Project, which should be pretty cool, performing some jazz based on Langston Hughes poetry. But this morning, we have a distinguished guest, and I'm going to hand the microphone off to my colleague, Professor DeVivo from Geography, to take care of the introductions.
Before I introduce Professor Yacher, please let me take a few moments to indicate to you that we are very fortunate to have been chartered the first chapter of Gamma Theta Epsilon, the International Geographical Honor Society, at a community college. We are today the only community college in the world to have a chapter of this International Geographical Honor Society. And Dr. Yacher will present this certificate, the charter of our Lambda Epsilon chapter, to Dr. Dan Lerner. Dr. Lerner, Professor Yacher.
Pleasure meeting you. We had a chance to talk for a couple of minutes. The one thing I want to tell you is that I was asked by the GTU Executive Committee to represent them in making this presentation. I'm a former president of the organization. My term ended literally a few months ago. And Howard Johnson, who's now the past president, and Donald Ziegler from Old Dominion University in Virginia asked me to be here, and really I'm pretty honored to do this. Professor DeVivo was absolutely right. You are the first community college, and hopefully many more, to join the ranks of this Geographical Honorary Society represented in every continent in the world. If any of you is a geographer or are taking several courses in geography, you're eligible, and you may want to ask the advisor behind me what the regulations are, and I hope you join. It is really an honor and a pleasure to present this to you and to GRCC. I also want to mention one more thing, that not only the efforts of Professor DeVivo are very welcome, but also he couldn't have done it without the support of the administration. It's one of the rules. And so I thank the administration being represented by Professor Lerner.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you for the faith that you've shown in Professor DeVivo and the program that he's built here, and in our students as well. And we're just delighted to have you here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Now, I will say perhaps a few moments of words about Professor Yacher, because as he just indicated, he is the past president of Gamma Theta Epsilon, the International Geographical Honor Society, but also has a number of other awards in his backpack. Formerly counselor of the Association of American Geographers, he's engaged in geographical scholarship, teaching, and service in the U.S. and abroad for more than 30 years. He was awarded a fellowship to pursue research in Latin American studies at Syracuse University, where he was awarded the doctorate in geography. He's received a number of academic honors and awards, among them the National Council for Geographic Education Distinguished Teaching Award, the Connecticut State University Faculty Scholar Award, and additionally, he's lectured on 4 continents and seen his research published in several different languages. Some of his colleagues in the discipline have referred to him as a true Renaissance man, for his research has been eclectic across the globe. For example, his work in the history of science has been devoted to the lives, thoughts, and impacts of various cartographers and geographers throughout Europe and the Americas. A Fulbright Fellowship was awarded for cultural geographic research and teaching in Central Asia, where he just returned from, by the way. Government support has been provided for research in Cuba with regard to political geography, and the National Geographic Society continues to award funding for research devoted to biogeography in the Andes of South America. In the United States, Professor Yacher's research has been associated, among other things, with ethnic studies, and his recent work on the development of African American communities in the Northeast is focused on New Haven, Connecticut. He's currently the professor of geography and director of the graduate program in urban studies at Southern Connecticut State University, where he teaches a course on ethnicity in American society. Now, this is just a very brief synopsis of Leon Yacher's professional accomplishments. These are widely known among academic geographers throughout the United States. What isn't known might be more relevant to some of you. He played basketball in the streets of Harlem after coming to this country a number of years ago, and he might talk about that later, with individuals like Lou Alcindor, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Wilt Chamberlain, as well as others. But before he came to this country, he was born and raised in Peru, and he was a minority in Peru because he was not a mestizo, and he was also not Christian. He was a Jew, so he suffered from discrimination, I guess you could say, being beaten up every now and then as one of very few members of his small ethnic group. He arrived in this country not speaking much English, in fact, no English, as a teenager. And when he went to high school, his guidance counselors recommended that he not pursue a college education, that instead he should become a plumber because his hands were big and long. Well, it's a good thing, I guess, that he did not follow his guidance counselor's advice. What's most relevant, perhaps, is that he began his post-high school studies at a community college in Connecticut, where it was there that he began to pursue these studies in the social sciences and humanities that helped him explore the world later on. So, there's more than I could say, but I'm not going to. We'll go ahead and turn this over to Leon Yacher.
Professor DeVivo has just made me very nervous. I had no idea that he knew this much. In fact, I've forgotten some of the things you mentioned. Thank you. Appreciate it. I'm a graduate of Norwalk Community College in New Haven, in Norwalk, Connecticut. And after my Norwalk experience, I quickly left Connecticut and went to the West Coast because I had to find an excuse to see the rest of the U.S. From then, I graduated in geography at the University of New Mexico, eventually went to Syracuse, where I, in fact, as Professor DeVivo said, I got the doctorate. I have been very fortunate in my career. And the only thing I will say, because of who you are, I owe it to the community college. People say, well, you know, the PhD, you have that, and you have a master's. Yeah, but without the community college, I promise you, I would not be here today. Of that, I can guarantee you. And for a number of reasons, some of which you may not even envision in your own mind, but the community college gave me the opportunity to be able to go beyond my previous possibility of following plumbing as a career. I still don't know much about plumbing. I do know how to turn the faucet on and off. That's pretty good. I want to do a couple of things for you today. One of them is to share with you some thoughts about the African American community in New Haven, Connecticut. Connecticut is a very small state. The population of New Haven is approximately 130,000, depending how you want to enumerate them. It is not an easy thing to do. Much of what I will share with you is not only an academic approach, but also something that we geographers do, and that is we try very hard to get our boots wet. And if we don't have boots, we use our shoes. Either way, fieldwork is one of the center fields, in my mind, of what we geographers do. New Haven is, again, a very small town. Most people that know New Haven because of this place called Yale University, which we at my university call Southern's other campus, not particularly important to us. On the other hand, Yale does control much of the centerpiece of the city. Because of Yale, and even though I made a little fun of it, actually it is an admirable place. Because of Yale, I am one of several that consider New Haven the most European city in the United States for a city of its size. So if you want to experience Europe without going to Europe, come to New Haven in the summer, and you will see restaurants with tables on the outside and people strolling, following a European kind of ambiance. In a city of 130,000, we have people from every country in the world at a given time. So New Haven is not exactly a city that should not be paid attention to, depending on how you look at it. It is that gave me the interest in following up and learning more about the city. By the way, what you see here is a map of the city. I got this from Google. You can do the same thing, obviously. And what I need to do is to tell you two very important things about the city from a geographer's perspective. What I'm going to be giving you is a historical geography type of talk. So it's history and geography mixed, and then what I will try to do is to put the history in the context of the geography. And you will see that I will do the reverse as well, and hopefully successfully, but you will be the judge of that. Two things about New Haven. One of them is that it has a wonderful harbor that at one time made New Haven one of the top 10 cities in the United States, certainly in the initial period, way before the independence of the country. And number two, the river, known as the Quinnipiac River, is a river that actually, for agricultural purposes and shell collecting, made this area very, very appealing to farmers and fishermen and so on and so forth. So there was a geographic and physical attraction to this area to begin with. The harbor, however, was able to house various kinds of ships that allowed a lot of trade back and forth between New Haven and many parts of the world, not just the region, but also as far as Europe. And when you consider the level of technology of the time, that is a pretty good accomplishment. New Haven competed easily with cities like New York and Philadelphia and Baltimore in terms of airport economy. The problem is that New Haven's harbor is in fact very shallow. This is the city of New Haven as it is now, the downtown area. The more important photograph is this photograph of the harbor itself. It's a very wide harbor, and it is dredged twice a week, sometimes a little bit, and then once every 6 months deeply. Twice a week we have ships from various parts of the world bringing in oil, as well as other materials, including fruits from northern South America, like bananas and so on. We also get shrimp from Colombia, which in fact it is distributed through the whole region. It has become a small center of non-container economy. And in the next 15 years, we're going to see tremendous fundamental changes in the port geography economy of the U.S. between the very large cities that only welcome containers versus the smaller cities like New Haven that will welcome non-containers. That is the bulk type of materials. Anyway, the harbor then began to cause a problem for New Haven as the ships began to be larger and they could not enter the harbor and did not allow New Haven to continue to compete with the larger cities that were able to grow as a result of very good harbors. Again, I'm thinking of Philadelphia, Baltimore, New York City, and to a lesser extent the city of Boston. But what I want to do, of course, is talk to you about the actual topic, which is about African Americans in the city of New Haven. The first African Americans arrived in the city very early in the game. By 1650, there were African Americans into the community. Yes, some of them were slaves, but many of them were free. And they had all kinds of rights, of which I will talk about in a few minutes. Certainly by 1790, you could see that there were almost 200 African Americans or blacks in the city of New Haven, occupying a whole variety of occupations. The city, when it was first developed, it developed in this part of the harbor. There's a very old map, as you can see, And this is the area that was founded first, which we call the 9-block area. It's a grid system, which many people think, following the Spanish grid system technique. Not at all. It has nothing to do with the Hispanic or the Spanish background. It is a purely self-made design for this area. And when the community was born and raised, it was raised in this direction and then towards the harbor in this direction. And the African-American population lived in the outside, in the periphery, far away from the central place. And again, this will be a preliminary theme that I'll be using in the next few minutes. So while they lived in this area, I will tell you the end of the story now. If you were to go to New Haven today, you will find that the African-American community lives in the very same place. So this is one of the oldest continuous African-American neighborhood or area in the United States of America, which in itself shows you a whole variety of things, not only longevity, but also steadiness. Well, one of the things that we tried to do then, in more contemporary basis, is to try to look at the geographic distribution of where people live, in this case, using the 2000 census. And these are the boundaries of the censuses, by the way. The 9-block area is located right here where it says 1401 and 1402. This whole area is the 9-block area. This part of the coast of New Haven, the harbor being here, has been filled with sand and other kinds of goods. So our coastline has expanded as a result of landfills. And though this area is susceptible to floods and so on, we do a pretty good job in controlling those floods. We haven't had many difficulties, but we're waiting for more global warming to find out if indeed that will affect us. The map that you see to your right is the geographic distribution of African Americans in the city of New Haven. And notice that a large number of them are in this area, which in fact coincides with what I told you just a couple of seconds ago, that not only did they settle very early in this particular area of New Haven, but they have remained there. Are there African Americans in other parts of the city? Of course there are. But the idea is that the actual core neighborhood is considered to be the steady one. And again, if you compare larger cities in the Northeast, particularly like New York and Boston, you will find that their patterns of where minority groups settle over the years do not necessarily have the consistency of the city of New Haven. New Haven has a nickname that many New Haveners like to say: we are a city of firsts, of many firsts. And I'll share a couple of them with you in the next few minutes. When you go to the next slide, you will see two things. One of them is the distribution of the Hispanic population, just for comparison purpose for you. And notice that also the Hispanics are settled in other parts of the city. By the way, the traditional Hispanic population is this area of the city known as Fairhaven. The largest group represented there within the Hispanic population is the Puerto Rican. And here you have the new Hispanics, Mexicans and people from South America, other countries of Central America, and they don't always mix in the same area. Notice the black community areas remain segregated. So as a city, yes, New Haven is very segregated, even though New Haven would like to say that there is a very good mix of the various ethnic groups. On the surface, it does look like there's a good mix, but when you go deep into it, you will find that there is segregation. But there's two answers. One of them is that the segregation, for the most part, is voluntary, by choice. And of course, the obvious, and that is sometimes there is no choice. Sometimes it's a result of a variety of reasons, including redlining and some other concept that many of you are familiar with. Here is the earlier map showing the expanding population of the African American outside the 9-block area, as I suggested earlier in the talk. Well, for those of you who are able to read it from this particular information, I will paraphrase very quickly that the majority of the African American population, the black population, live in areas straddling this Dixwell Avenue corridor in the edge of the 9th square area that I mentioned to you before. And they go all the way to the border to the next town called Hamden. There's a spillover effect, certainly in the last 20 years, into the Hamden area. The fact is that, as I mentioned to you before, and I'm really reviewing here, the idea is that they are essentially living in the area they originally settled. So when you drive through the neighborhood, or you walk through the neighborhood, you will see a tremendous number of icons that represents the black population of New Haven through time, in the form of buildings, in the form of shape of neighborhoods, in the form of programs that exist in the area that makes this a very, very interesting place to visit and study, and live in, by the way. The problem, of course, as has been the case throughout the history of the United States for minority groups, in this case the African American community, is that as much as they had continuity and settlement, they did not have political power. They had no political clout in any sense of the word. Essentially, they were recipient of whatever policies were being done at the time. Today, the story is a lot different, but we're talking about the past first. The outside of this area that I showed you in the maps before, there are other places where the African American community lives in. Places like Brookside, for example, which as of late last year has been demolished little by little because the conditions there were so abysmal that really the decision was made to simply erase that neighborhood, that whole area, and start from scratch. Right now, if you were to go there, it is totally absent of any kind of building, never mind any kind of activity. Certainly, there's another area known as the Hill, which is doing okay, but unfortunately, the quality of life there, while it's okay, it is okay only. And certainly, there are a lot of professionals who live there, African American professionals, and they want to see changes taking place, and many of them are being very, very active, of which I'll be sharing the thoughts of one of them a little bit later today. By 1820, about 8% of the population of the city of New Haven was black, and the percentages decreased after that period of time until the early 1960s, as I will show you in a couple of seconds. Throughout the earlier years, there were few in number. Percentages were relatively small, 8% or less from the peak. They were powerless in many different ways. They were deprived of education. They did not have any real access to a profitable economy. Many of them were domestic servants, so they work as farmers or farmers' helpers. Equally important, in the 1950s, as a result of the move from the south towards the north, which affected cities like Detroit and many of the cities here in the state of Michigan, in the northeast, Pennsylvania, and so on, New Haven was equally affected by a tremendous migration from the south to the north. And the population began to increase to the point in which today the largest minority in the city of New Haven are the African Americans. This is a chart that shows you the percentage of the population from the total population that is African American through time. In 1790, a little less than 5%. It increased to 1820 to almost 9%. Then it decreased tremendously until the early 1950s, and then by the mid-1960s, you began to see the numbers increase to the point in which in 2007, the estimate is that almost 40% of the total population of the city of New Haven is African American and heavily influenced by their culture. The numbers are a little more telling. In 1970, 130,000 people made the city of New Haven. In 1980, we lost 4,000. Today, it's about 130 again. So we kind of yo-yoed our population numbers over the decades. Notice the black population went from 47,000 in 1970 to 40,000 in 1980. Today, it's about 44,000, 45,000. What I do want to share with you is that while in 1970, 36% of the population was African American, 32% in 1980, today it's about 42%, if not a little bit higher. What is also telling is that a third of them in 1980 were below the poverty level, and today the percentage is probably closer to 36 to 37% below the poverty level. Let me put this in context. Of the 50 states of the United States, Connecticut ranks first in per capita income. And in the last 28 years, Connecticut has ranked first 25 of those 28 years. The 3 years we were not first, it was the state of Alaska that was first because of their oil revenue. So we have consistently had very good quality of income in that respect. Now, while we rank first in per capita income, theoretically, the richest state in the United States, per capita, of course, we have 3 of the 20 poorest cities in the United States. New Haven, Hartford, the capital, and Bridgeport, which is the largest city of the cities in the state of Connecticut. So what I'm trying to share with you is that Connecticut has many of what we call developing economies or third world countries, whatever term you prefer, because I'm not sure what's in vogue nowadays. The idea is that we have in Connecticut the same extremes of many countries in the world where they have very, very wealthy people living side by side with very poor people. Though Connecticut says that we have a very large middle class economy, as a matter of fact, we do, but not in the cities. In the cities, we don't have a middle class, really. What we have is the very, very poor and the very few who are very dominant, very wealthy communities. If you were to take Yale University out of New Haven, if you were to take my institution, which is within the borders of New Haven, that's Southern Connecticut State University. We have 6 universities in the New Haven area for a town of 130,000. That's okay. That's pretty good. If you were to take Yale, and perhaps us, but Yale out, New Haven would really become a really dismal place. Yale plays a very important role in the vitality of the city, in every sense of the word, particularly economically. It's the largest employer of the city. So what we've got here then is a terrible problem of the haves and the have-nots. Have things changed a lot? Yes, and I'll try to share some of those thoughts with you. But I'll probably leave a lot more questions in your mind than answers. And so I hope that the second thing I will be doing, as I told you at the beginning of the talk, is to have a question and answer period and exchange of ideas with all of you, if not with most of you. The metro population of New Haven is about 500,000. That includes all the communities surrounding it. So you can get an idea of the context of the population. Notice that 52,000 in 1980 were African Americans, of which 40,000 lived within the borders of New Haven City. So the overwhelming majority of the people who are African American live in the New Haven area, and those that live in the surrounding area are far and few in between. Well, what is the African American community in New Haven? It's a multicultural group of individuals from a wide variety of parts in the world. Certainly, it's a very well-established community, one of the oldest, if not among the oldest in the United States. And since it's small in size, well, it has its own characteristics that are not necessarily similar to those of the very larger cities. Most arrived in the 1960s as the economy of the United States began to get into the manufacturing in the northeastern part at a heavy rate. And as is the case with, again, as I mentioned to you before, many people from the South were leaving for their appropriate reasons to hopefully a better life in the North. That for many of them, it did turn out to be a better life, but not a perfect life. Today, what we're experiencing in New Haven is what we call return migration. People who left when they were younger in the South are now at retirement age. Some of them have done very well for themselves, and they want to go back to the South. And so what's happening is that in New Haven, we're experiencing a lot of the return migration. We're noticing the same to be true in cities like New York, where a lot of people are returning to the South. A recent study by a colleague of mine in Illinois showed that people in Chicago, many African Americans, are also returning to the South with money, buying up land and investing it in a variety of ways. Some of them are getting into farming, others are building condo complexes, depending on their own goals, of course. Because of some of that return migration and changes in the economy, what we have in the city of New Haven is, in fact, an increase of unemployment. And with the economy, as many of you know today, it is affecting every corner of the United States, with New Haven being affected not differently. A little bit of the variety of population in the city. The largest population group in the city is approximately white, Caucasian, 56,000 people, give or take. Look at the percentages if you can, and then notice For me, the most important one is the idea of the poverty rate. Using 1999 numbers, the numbers post-1999 are not that much different. A quarter of the population of the city of New Haven is below the poverty rate, whereas in the whole state is 8%, and in the county, which we don't have a county system in Connecticut, by the way, we're the only state of the 50 that has no county government, nothing, since 1959, as a matter of fact. And so we go from the town straight to the state. There's no county to mess around with. So the idea is that what we've got here is a population that, in fact, is poor. Also notice the Hispanic population of any race. It is becoming more and more sizable, however, still behind the African American population, which in many ways is unusual because, as most of you know, in the last few years, the Hispanic population has increased at a rate higher than that of the African American population, and now Hispanics are the larger minority in the United States, but not in New Haven, that's for sure. We have the same ills as many cities have, many of the large cities or small cities in the United States. Abandoned houses, foreclosures were a lot more common in New Haven before the economic collapse than from the economic collapse. So when the foreclosure rates began to increase in other parts of the state and the region, people in New Haven said, well, what's new? We've had experienced that quite a lot. The quality of housing is very, very poor. But there are programs in the city that provide all kinds of incentives. For example, if you have $1, you can buy this house. And then you have 5 years and spend $5,000 per year to rejuvenate this house, to fix the house and bring it up to code. In those 5 years, you spend the $5,000 by going to Home Depot or whatever you want to do, fix the house, and the dollar remains the only dollar you will pay, and you don't pay any property taxes. The property taxes in New Haven are the highest in the state, and let's just say that an average house that is valued at $200,000, for example, pays about $30,000 worth of property tax, including all the residuals. I am not certain what part of the country has those kinds of rates. So part of the reason why people are migrating out of the city is they can't afford to even pay their property taxes, never mind some other issues. We in Connecticut have not only one of the highest income taxes in the state, supposedly designed to take money away from the very wealthy, but the poor also get affected. And in fact, in terms of another tax that you may be interested in knowing, with Hawaii, we have the highest tax on gasoline in the United States. So right now, as I've been driving in the last few days here in the Grand Rapids area, I keep saying, my gosh, gas is so cheap. Because while you guys are paying about $1.80, $1.85, we're paying $2.20, $2.30. So when gas went up to $4 here, there were places in Connecticut where we were paying $5. And it's pretty neat when you have an SUV and it costs you $200 to fill up the tank. You don't see people smiling too often when that happens. But so the city does have programs to create incentives, particularly for people who are in a minority group, in order to save these houses. Some of these houses are quite old, and they're structurally very sound. What they need is somebody that cares. What we have found in New Haven is something that we have found throughout the United States, particularly in the last 20 years, and kind of a program that a president of the United States called William Clinton introduced, and is a concept that says that if you own the house, you own the pride in it. So the idea was to provide the kind of programs to encourage everyone to buy houses. And that's exactly what happened in New Haven. And though it didn't work overall because of a variety of other reasons, today the African American community has more house ownership now than ever in the history of New Haven. And if you were to go to this area, you could see pride. You own the land, you own the house, you want to make sure your neighbor cuts the lawn. Up to the time that Bill Clinton became president, the African American community, for the most part, rented. And they were very mobile from one house to another house. The program, by the way, did not start in New Haven. I wish I could give New Haven credit for this. The program started in a place called Harlem, New York, in the city of New York. Okay, the new immigrant And also some of the old steady person brought with them new ideas, new ways of thinking, including the introduction of Islam into the community. We have 4 mosques, all African Americans, in a town of 130,000. I am not certain how many mosques there are in cities like this throughout the United States. Very active community, and more importantly, very proactive, which is a really interesting thing, because the more proactive you are, the fewer mistakes you will make. To put things in context a little bit more, before I go into the next part of the presentation I want to give you, just to show you the map of the United States in terms of the number of African Americans per state. Obviously, Michigan, a large state, like many of the other larger states, have a very large population. Connecticut, pretty small. We don't have a particularly large community in terms of numbers. And so to put this in context then, it would allow me to go next to what I will now call the disproportionate influence of New Haven in terms of the African American community. Before I do that, I need to talk to you about the role of slavery in the state of Connecticut. As I mentioned to you before, Connecticut, New Haven, is known as a city of firsts in many different ways. People argue that the French fry was invented in New Haven at Louis, still active. Some people argue that the hamburger was invented in New Haven. Maybe so. I don't know. I wasn't there. But our hamburgers are competitive. How is that? The idea is that the institution of slavery existed in Connecticut, but it was more tolerated than approved or encouraged. As it says here, it was never really implemented in the state, never mind in the city. And overall, the economy required very few workers as it was required in other parts of the country, particularly the southern part of the United States. But what happened is that West Indies, because of our wonderful harbor, did encourage the exposure to the slave system. Inevitably, it affected New Haven a lot in many different ways. And often when there were surplus of the slave population, they were offered to the local population, which most of them did not tolerate it. On the other hand, there were mixed feelings, as you can see here, of the situation. But people looked the other way, mostly because they wanted to keep peace between those who were very strongly supporting the slave economy versus those who oppose it. New Haven is not known for having a gray area. We, in many ways, are a city of extremes, and I already showed you some extremes in the terms of the population distribution. And so when it came to this issue, there were people who were just violently opposed to the slave concept. But there were others who were supported. Either way, there was a concept of toleration, and slaves in the state of Connecticut had many rights, and particularly in the city of New Haven. For example, they had the idea that if an owner would punish the slave harshly, the slave could go to court and sue the master. We have many evidences in the Yale Law Library that shows that not only the slaves sued their masters, but they won the suit. And in exchange, they were given a variety of compensations, of which the slave had the right to negotiate. So if the slave did not like what is being offered, they'll say, nope, I don't want it, I want something else. When you put it in context of that time, not today, of course, that's a pretty progressive situation. If a slave were to be killed by the master would be charged with murder and see time in prison, if not executed at the time. There is no evidence that anybody was executed. On the other hand, there is plenty of evidence in the archives of the New Haven Historical Society that show that white owners spend time in prison, in jail, with no privileges that you would consider extra. So New Haven then was a type of city that had to live with the reality of where the country was at with its own value system. And its own value system played an important role. Well, what's really interesting here is that while they had these rights, they didn't have all the rights. For example, social progress for them was a very difficult thing to achieve. It was not easy for them to go to schools, even though schools were founded in the underground. I'll share with that in a few minutes. There were some limitations in terms of their wages. They earn less than white people earn for the same job. Well, right there's a problem, isn't there, in terms of fairness and equitability. But that's the way it was then. With few exceptions, blacks were excluded from being educated. And those few exceptions created problems for many people in New Haven, of which I will share some thoughts in a few minutes. They did found their own schools. Many of them were underground, admittedly so. But there were many whites who would sneak into the churches or the schools and help the African American, the black, to learn how to read and write and express. There are plenty of examples of that happening. But there were other problems, of course, that had to be liberalized, even in the context of Connecticut at that time. One of the important things is that Connecticut was one of the earlier states to abolish the practice of slavery. Certainly, by the 1800s, the whole process was done away with. It doesn't mean that everybody obey the law. We have to be realistic about this. In the history of New Haven, there are two major events that really shaped the state. And both of these events are very, very important. Some of you have heard certainly of one of those two events. One of them is that there was no question that slavery was really not thought of in a positive fashion in any way or form. And so the tolerance factor was to keep things in peace. The first event that really challenged the fabric of the city of New Haven and the people who live there, I'm thinking more of the Caucasians, the white people, is number one, the attempt to open by a man called Simeon Jocelyn a university, a college. And he was a white man who was very wealthy. He was totally opposed to the concept of inequality. In his memoirs, he uses very strong language saying, "We are equal." Case closed. And having money helps a little, as you probably know. So he tried to open a university, but the town government objected to it. Many were worried about things like the socialization of whites and blacks. So there were still concerns about people socializing in the same room, as it were. So one of the things that happened is there was a lot of rioting in the streets of New Haven at that time. And many blacks were killed by the white mobs, the intolerant population. And in order to keep peace, the whole idea was dropped. However, it was not dropped totally, because in the underground process, people were being educated. And I'll show you some of that in a few minutes. The second event is one event that really had an effect nationwide. And those of you who are familiar with the Amistad episode, you know what I'm talking about. There's a ship called the Amistad. The word Amistad means friendship in Spanish, that actually was chartered in Cuba, taking a bunch of cargo, including slaves, towards the island of Principe. It never got there. And it never got there for a variety of reasons, including the fact that there was an African young man, literally African, born in the continent. His name was Cinque. Cinque is a word that has various meanings in African languages. But I will share with you a little bit later basically what it means. It means free always, but not in a true translation. I'm not sure about the true translation. Cinque led a mutiny of the ship. The captain and the cook were killed. He demanded to go for the ship to return to Africa. Never got there. It was found floating off the coast of Long Island in the state of New York. The ship was brought into New Haven, and it began a series of events that really, in many ways, changed the history of not only New Haven, Connecticut, but also, I believe, played an important role in the U.S. history. The Amistad was brought to New London, then brought to New Haven. The incident attracted a lot of attention. One of the reasons why is because a place called Yale University was there with a very strong law school. If you were to look at the rankings of the law schools in the United States and the world, Yale is consistently in the top 3. Whether it's number 1, 2, or 3 at that stage, it doesn't make any difference. The students were, in fact, involved in the whole legal proceedings. The New Haven Circuit Court, to make a long story short, proved the innocence of Cinque and the Africans and said, go home. You can do whatever you want. You're free to go anywhere you wish. The lawsuit was challenged, and it went to the Supreme Court of the United States. And in 1841, on March, the Supreme Court of the United States in Washington upheld the lower court, that is the Connecticut court, in terms of the freedom of not only Cinque but all of his compatriots. The idea was that, among other things, circumstances had to be taken into account as to why Cinque acted the way he did. So the courts, in fact, came in favor of that, and the 6th President of the United States, John Quincy Adams, for more than 8 hours, argued in the Supreme Court in favor of the African population. He, by the way, John Quincy Adams, was someone who did not endorse slavery. He was an abolitionist in every sense of the word. Well, here's Mr. Cinque, and the Amistad is obviously in the lower left corner. If you ever come to Connecticut, please feel free to visit New London and Mystic Seaport, and you'll be able to go into the Amistad with no problem. It has been refurbished, obviously, and the history is quite telling, because among other things, the community took the results of this particular event as a historical start for things to change significantly within, certainly, the community of New Haven. Well, let's move forward a little bit to see some of the things that has happened in New Haven in terms of the African American community. And the events that I'm going to share with you are not necessarily those that could be found in other parts of the country. And I will say that for 2 reasons and then make one suggestion. One of the reasons is because we know very little about what's going on in other parts of the country. There aren't enough people doing the kind of research. And I don't know the literature for Grand Rapids, for example, but I'm probably safe to say that there aren't enough people doing the research about the African American community in this town that could shed some light as to what their life or their conditions or their history is, never mind their contributions. So I would encourage for someone to think about this and perhaps pursue doing this kind of work. I literally woke up one morning in New Haven and said, we know nothing about the African American community. So I decided to start doing this. And the more I got into it, the more I found, to the point in which I have scratched the surface of the earth. And what you're seeing here is a result of several years of trying to dig some of this information. Certainly, as early as the 1800s, African Americans were already leaders in the community. With all of the problems they had to face on a daily and a routine basis, they really were people who were ahead of the curve. And until somebody else proves it otherwise, I will argue that New Haven was ahead of the curve. So I'm challenging anyone in this room to find out that I'm right or wrong. Until then, I'll stick to what I'm saying. How is that? Blacks owned, by the turn of the century, 1900, over $10 million worth of property, and could be found in virtually every profession. By then, the term discrimination was a term that was not used in the community. In everything I've read, including letters, I do a lot of primary document research. I don't read necessarily books. I read letters that people have written. Words like, discrimination or favoritism does not exist in those letters. Now, mind you, I will admit that maybe 90% of the letters were lost as a result of floods, time, whatever you want to call it. But I got to go with what I have. And if I have 10%, that's the 10% I'm going to use until I find something else. The idea is that there were a lot of doctors, a lot of leaders in the health community, several nurses that led the way. They invented things that were, in fact, incorporated into the hospitals of not only the African American community, but also the white community and other communities as well. Inventions that and innovations that, in fact, still few people have been given credit for this. And this is going to change, hopefully, with myself and students that I have at Southern. We're hoping to just revise the story, not only the history, but the story of not only the African American community, but also other communities as well. Certainly, there were many teachers, and these people were incredibly innovative. And one of my favorite persons is Ethel Williams, who not only insisted in teaching black students, but she wanted also non-black. So she teach to mixed classes. The idea was community. She used to use the word community all the time. When we use the word community, we don't always mean what the word is meant to be understood as. Most of them lived, as I told you before, in the Dixwell Avenue area. So yes, there were white kids that were walking to the black neighborhoods to go to school in the black neighborhoods because they thought the teachers were better. In politics, from a very early stage, the African American community has shaped politics in New Haven quite a lot. Tolliver was the first alderman in the city in 1921. I got another one that's a little bit better than this example. But he was also one of the very first, if not the first, black official elected in the state of Connecticut. But equally important, he was a Yale graduate. New Haven had its first mayor in 1989, Mr. John Daniels, whose photograph is right here, giving a talk. But if you were just to read very quickly, you will find that if you come to New Haven and you walk through the city in terms of the Board of Education, a black person leads it. The Board of Health, a black person. There is a tremendous presence in the politics of the state, and the city, I should say. Including the fact that we have many of the charter members of the NAACP who are, in fact, New Haven residents and were New Haven residents. Some of the historical remnants, part of the historical geography of the region, includes many buildings that I alluded to earlier in the talk. The Gough Street Special School, 1864. It was just one of those schools in which not only taught little kids to read and write, most of them African American, but they also trained them to go to college. And they did go to Yale, and they went to other schools. I went through the archives of my own university, which is over 100 years old, and there's plenty of examples of African Americans attending Southern. What's really strange is that percent-wise, we now bring into Southern fewer African Americans than Southern did at the beginning of its history 100 years ago. So for African Americans, my university is not the campus of choice. They have other choices. And from their perspective, better choices, whatever that means, I'm not sure. But certainly, the city has many examples of buildings and icons, as I mentioned to you before, including a small Jewish community, African American that is Jewish, that has his own black rabbi and his own synagogue. One of my favorite stories is the story of Hanna Gray. And as you can see here, she was a seamstress in the mid-1900s, 19th century, in the 1850s. Whatever money she used to make, it was to really educate students as well as send them to the divinity school at Yale. She started at church. She was an abolitionist, of course. When she died in 1961, she bequeathed her home to the benefit of African American women who are elderly. And in fact, that house still exists, except for a 4-year period when there was no funding. So the city of New Haven today funds this house that welcomes not only elderly women of African American descent, but also any woman who's elderly and is indigent. So it doesn't have to be an African American woman. She really is one of many people who led the way with support. She couldn't have done it alone, of course, with support of not only other black members of the community, but also the white community. And in that order, by the way. So here's an example of what the house looks like. It's still there, but the Hana senior home has now moved to a larger building, and they're now housing. In fact, the website, if you go to the website, you see exactly what it looks like with their parties and so on. This church was destroyed just about a little over a year and a half ago, mainly because of structural reasons. This is the Zion Church, which is probably one of the oldest churches, continuous churches of the African American community. In fact, this church, I was very fond of it for a variety of reasons besides being old and historically very important, but I actually gave a talk in this church several years ago about the African American community. A talk a little similar like this one, before it was unfortunately demolished because, again, structurally it was just in deep trouble. Nonetheless, we have many other leading citizens, and you'll be surprised about some of them. One of them is Amos Beeman. He was really a pastor in the Temple Street Church in New Haven, which still exists, by the way. And he was a professor at Wesleyan University. And yeah, he was African American. And so, when we talk about professors of various disciplines in Connecticut, we don't question whether they are African American or not. We know that there were many. George Crawford was an incredible lawyer who played an important role in the civil rights movement of that time. I'll be telling you a little bit more about it in the next slide about him. He was one of the founding members of the NAACP. He founded, as you can see, a couple of universities, including two trustees of two black colleges. And he was the first to introduce, here's one of those firsts, he was the first to introduce not only zoning laws in the city of New Haven, but also in the state of Connecticut. And in fact, there's evidence that he might have been the first one in the U.S. So here it is. Any kind of zoning law that you may be affected by here in Grand Rapids might have had its roots, its birth, in the state of Connecticut. Although Bassett was born in Litchfield, Connecticut, he spent most of his life in New Haven. He got, again, a degree at Yale. But he is very important for a number of other reasons, including the fact that he is the first black diplomat of the United States. He was an ambassador to Haiti and to the Dominican Republic in that order. And this happened a long time ago, certainly in the 1800s. Very, very few people realize that we've had African American ambassadors in the history of the United States long ago. It didn't start in the last 5 years. And so here it is, a man called Bassett, who not only represented the interests of the United States in the island of Hispaniola, which is made up of Haiti and the Dominican Republic, but he also played an important role in advising presidents. I said presidents, not president, more than one president. Mr. Crawford not only was a great lawyer and influential in a variety of ways, but more importantly, people have been honoring him by creating various organizations in his name, including the Black Bar Association. If you're a lawyer in the state of Connecticut and you're African American, you belong to it. And this is an organization that meets regularly, and I just took this out from the website, so you can actually go back to the website if you want to Google it, and you will find that this particular bar is the strongest bar for any minority group in the United States. Has played an important role in many civil rights cases throughout the recent history of the United States. The lawyers that belong to this group are ranked among the most desirable for almost any kind of employment. So when we think of the First Lady of the United States being an attorney, I'm thinking of people like her who have had this kind. I don't know if she belongs to the Crawford Bar or not, but certainly the influence of particularly African American women has been tremendous, particularly when it comes to issues on child care, single mothers, and issues on quality of life. And it really is an impressive group of people. Here's a photograph of Mr. Bassett, and his resting place is in the city of New Haven. As I mentioned to you before, he was the first ambassador of the United States, not only to Haiti, but in the history of the United States. and he was an ambassador in the 1870s for a much, and his counsel was in fact continually sought by leaders in the, I will use, in the community, not only African American community, but in the white community. My last photograph and my last slide is of someone that I knew. He argued that he knew me when we were young. I do not remember meeting him. He died last week on the 3rd of this month, unfortunately. His name is Warren Kimbrough. I've interviewed him several times, certainly 2 6-hour sessions. I usually know that I can talk a lot and I can express a lot and I can withstand a lot of things. But interviewing him was a trial because he would talk for 6 hours, which is all right. But the information that he would provide was, every sentence was what I call precious. Everything he said I wanted to quote. Fortunately, I taped it, so I do have his interview. The photograph on the left is Warren when he was a young man in 1974. He was a member of the Black Panther movement in the 1960s. He committed murder. He killed another African American who the Black Panther community accused him of being an informant to the FBI. They didn't take that very lightly. So Warren and his colleague took it upon themselves. Supposedly Bobby Seals ordered the murder. There is no evidence that ever happened. Bobby Seals was, in fact, one of the leaders of the Black Panther community in the U.S. He was, in fact, put in jail in New Haven and was released when there was no way of proving that he ordered anything. The fact is that Warren not only admitted to the murder, but he served time in prison. And when he was released from prison, this is a man that truly changed his life. He died of a heart attack at the age of 74, a little more than a week ago, and I'm sorry that I was not able to be there. But he, in the early 1980s, after he spent time in prison, started a program known as MORE, M-O-R-E, which is a counseling service that, in fact, advised and helped ex-convicts getting back to the community. When it was originally introduced by Warren, it was solely for the African American community, but now you will find that it crosses every racial and ethnic group. The program is a success. It's a success because the percentage of people who are ex-convicts returning to the mainstream community is the highest of any in the country. Now, why am I making an issue out of it? Because I'm talking about 1983. I'm not talking about the year 2009. I'm talking about a time when these kinds of things were simply not in the vocabulary of most Americans in this country. So Mr. Kimbrough then really proceeded to change the lives of hundreds and hundreds of people. And what you can do, if you wish, is to read a book called Murder in the Model City. New Haven's nickname is called the Model City. The Black Panthers, Yale, and the Redemption of a Killer. And Mr. Kimbrough wrote this book with this man called Paul Bass. And if you are interested, I think you should read it. It may provide you with a contextual story of what was happening then, at a time where other parts of the country were oblivious to these kinds of things. So the idea, again, is that New Haven has had its pretty good history in many ways, with its flaws and its problems. But I know I'm running out of time, so I will stop at this moment, and if anyone, and hopefully many of you will, I will answer any and all questions. I only want to warn you about one thing, not that it's an excuse. I was given today about an hour to talk about almost 400 years of history and geography. And I've learned over the years of being an instructor, I just don't know how to do that. So there are a lot of gaps that I left open. And if you have any specific questions, if I know the answer, I'll fill that gap.
If you have a question, raise your hand. We'll bring a microphone around to you so it can be heard on camera. Are there any questions for Thank you, Yacher.
Here you go.
I just first want to say on behalf of the students, thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
And then my question for you is actually pertaining to education. In New Haven, have you seen a contrast in the quality of education, or maybe the diversity of the different populations, or anything like that?
Yes and no. The yes is that the diversity is there. The no is that you're looking at a city that has a very large minority presence. And as a result of that, you can go to schools like Wilbur Cross High School, for example, in which the 80% of the population is African American. Then you go to another high school in which 60-70% is either African American and or Hispanic. So yes, there's a diversity, but the very fact that the population is slanted in one direction prevents the full diversity that you're talking about. If you're asking the question in terms of the quality of education, New Haven suffers from the very same problems that any other city in the country has. We have lousy funding. Teachers are not always given the materials they need. I do workshops for many of the schools in the state of Connecticut, and I find consistently that many teachers, and I'm using this as a metaphor, many teachers have to buy their own chalk. And what that means is that if they want to give students a project to do, they usually buy their own paper and they're bringing it in, and that comes out of their income, of course. The funding has been abysmal. But the main issue here is how many of the people that are, in fact, graduating from the high schools of New Haven, the majority are African Americans and Hispanics in that order, proceed on to college or other places, because that's one way in which you can show the success of the program, of the educational system. If you have a very high dropout rate, if you have a lot of people abandoning schools for a variety of reasons, it doesn't have to be a dropout, it could just be migration, moving from one place to the other. There's a problem for the Hispanic population who are very transient. Then you need to evaluate. You're going to find a number, some kind of an index to show if there is success. The answer to that question, if that's part of what your question is that the results are very mixed. We have a very high dropout rate. We have the same ills that other cities have, high crime, poverty that I mentioned to you before. And poverty contributes to crime. You can use the word survival as a word that describes some of the reasons why. But we also have the good stories, and that is we have a good percentage of students that graduate from New Haven that go to the top schools in the United States. A few minutes ago I alluded to the fact that very few African American students come to Southern Connecticut State University where I teach. Well, because they're going to Yale, they're going to Harvard, they're going to Brown, they're going to Penn State, they're going to University of Michigan. They're going to what they perceive to be the better schools, and rightfully so. Because if you look at the ranking of my university in comparison to the university I just mentioned, we're not in the same ranking. We're not a Division I anything. So we have a completely different mission. So the absence of those students coming to us does not mean that the students are not going to college, is that they have greater choices. And I hope that I answered your question. If I didn't, you may want to rephrase it. Did I? Okay. Anyone else?
Following up on that, is part of the reason that Southern Connecticut State University is experiencing a lower African American enrollment partly attributed to community colleges that might be preparing more for a lower price?
Connecticut has 12 community colleges, one of which is my alma mater, Norwalk Community. And I teach part-time at Gateway Community College, which is in New Haven. I teach there for one course, mainly because they need a geographer, and I refuse to have a non-geographer teach geography. And Mr. DeVivo knows what I mean with that, and I think you can identify with that. The community colleges attract the African-American population at tremendous numbers. So Gateway Community College, which is in New Haven, has a population of probably 60% African American, but the majority of these students are students that are at the remedial level. They're people who really cannot go into a Yale, they're not prepared to go to a university that is very, very demanding. What they need is exactly a community college, because it's a bridge that allows them to, if they're ambitious, and they are motivated, they can literally do what I've done, gone from potentially being a plumber to being in front of you. So the idea is that many of the people that I teach at the community college are people who for whatever reasons need remedial work. And the success of the community college, certainly Gateway, with the students, again, to be consistent in my answer, is mixed. Some people literally have not only done well, but have gone from Gateway Community College to a top 10 school with no problem, with scholarships and other benefits, and some simply have not succeeded. We have a high dropout rate at Gateway. Our dropout rate is approximately 35% the first semester. That's huge. And the dropout rate is for all the reasons that many of you know. And I hope I answered your question. I hope you don't mind my frankness, anyway. Yes.
I too would like to say thank you, Dr. Yacher, for being Yacher. Excuse me.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Here. And I have a couple of questions. One, do the students take advantage of that housing program, which was the single dollar, and then they could live there? That seems like an opportunity for them to have housing if they were to move from, any other part of the country. Or
based on the data that I've been exposed to, no student has taken any of those $1 house opportunity programs. Most of the people who are taking these benefits are what I will call the new African American middle class, or perhaps lower middle class, who have an income and who are advised, and they are really nurtured by a variety of people, including people in banking, that the important thing is not getting the house for $1, and the important thing is not to invest $5,000 every year for the next 5 years. The important thing is to be realistic that you'll be here in 10, 15, and 20 years. Because one of the things that happens is that a lot of us make decisions that are not always long-term. We can walk into a house without a down payment today, but the question is, can we keep the house? And as you know from what's going on in the economy of the United States, a lot of people were able to walk into houses, and now they're being repossessed because they cannot afford to keep them. So most of the people that took advantage of this program are people who were in a better financial means for long-term benefits.
Okay, so that was another part of my question.
Yes.
Is the housing located in an area where people who are in a better financial state can move into the area? Because like Detroit, here in Michigan, the Detroit area is probably not the best place for someone who financially can afford the housing there should move into.
Your question is on target. It's a very important question. The areas that are being offered are areas that are areas in trouble, areas in blight, areas that need a infusion of monies. So the African American who's a professional, who's an attorney, who's a doctor, will not live in this area. They live in the suburbs, and they own the big houses, and they have the pools like everybody else. The people that are being targeted are people who have professions, such as nurses, that make enough money for long term, but not enough to own a house. So here's an opportunity for a nurse that may make, let's say, $35,000 a year, who is renting. She may be a single mother, and on her own is simply not being able to walk into a bank and say, give me a mortgage and get away with it. This program gives her that opportunity. And since she has the $5,000 to spend every year, she doesn't have to do the entire house the first year. She can do the kitchen first, or she can do the bedrooms first, and she can do it little by little by little. And yes, city officials will provide contractors who will not charge an arm and a leg for a simple job. That is, make a bathroom functional. Make a kitchen functional. Does that make sense? So the people who benefited are the people who should be benefiting, as opposed to the wealthy people that comes in. In fact, there were several wealthy people, African Americans, who came in to the neighborhood and wanted to buy the different houses, so they could begin the idea of owning a lot. They were rejected. Not one person with a certain income or higher were able to get the houses bought. But you saw the greed among these people say, oh my gosh, I can live in Woodbridge, the average house goes for $600,000 a year. If I buy half of the block, I'll, invest some money, I'll rent it, and I'll make even more money. The answer was no.
I'm also curious if there's a large community of religious African Americans that never came out, but the diverse religious or groups that are going into the area, but people more specifically with Christian denomination background.
Oh yes, the largest community in New Haven of the African Americans are Baptist, but they're Presbyterians. There are some from follow Islam. The Islam community is the most proactive. They provide, among other things, services for the homeless. They provide particularly food, soup kitchens, and so on, at no cost to the homeless. And in the wintertime, when it gets wicked cold out there, they have a place to spend the night. The Baptist church is more traditional. But the answer is yes, there's a diversity of religious groups represented in New Haven, including, as I mentioned to you, a small Jewish community with their own rabbi, African-American rabbi. An offshoot from the Jewish community in Harlem, which is the largest Jewish community in the United States, African-American. I hope I answered your question.
Doctor, thanks again for swinging by.
My pleasure.
College. Regarding how African Americans were structurally assimilated in New Haven, how did the African American community assimilate through primary structure as well as intermarriage?
When I was a kid in the 1960s, in the middle of some of the problems that we had, social problems we had in New Haven, including racial riots, it was not unusual for a black man to be with a white woman. It was not unusual to see a white woman with a black man, but that was less common than the black man with a white woman. Many of them are intermarried. And in the neighborhoods that we're talking about, many of the people who benefit in this dollar deal were intermarriage couples. Many, I didn't say most, many. So the interrelationship between racial groups and ethnic groups in New Haven probably took place sooner than in other parts of the country. And it was tolerated and accepted a lot better. Were there problems in those places? Yes, there were. I'm not going to tell you it was heaven and it was Shangri-La. There's no such thing. There were several problems, and there were people who did not see positively that a black man would be with a white woman and vice versa. And the problems were on both communities, not only white people resenting the white woman being with a black man, but also the black community resenting that the black man would go to a white woman. And so you saw the whole thing happening. I was a big brother for several years to a kid. He was so little now, he's taller than I am. And I was a big brother with him for about 2 years until his uncle found out that I was white. The problem that he had is that he heard about me, but since my name is Leon, there are a lot of black people whose name is Leon, so he assumed I was black. When he found out I was white, he made his sister, who is the mother of the boy, he made her life miserable to the point in which I said, look, the best thing is for me just to simply remove myself. This man was just so racist, not only with non-African Americans, but within the African community he was racist. Because he would talk about the level of blackness of somebody's skin. Okay? So he would create that layering That man was simply racist, that's all. He happened to be a black man who's racist. Nothing more, nothing less. But he made his sister's life miserable. And in fact, what I said, the last thing I said to the boy's mother is, look, when this boy is ready to go to college, you let me know, and I will pay for his education. All I want is for him to get a B average when he graduates from high school. The uncle found out about it, and boy, I don't have to tell you what happened. And no, I have not been able to pay for his tuition. Good kid. Smart, my goodness.
Dr. Yacher, we're not going to let you get out of here without talking about your days playing basketball in Harlem and some of the people you played with. Would you share some of that with our students?
Yes, I was very lucky in that respect. I went to a high school called Norwalk High School, and one of my classmates was a man called Calvin Murphy. Calvin Murphy graduated from high school in 1966, went on to Niagara University, and then eventually to the Houston Rockets before they moved to San Diego, where they are playing now. Well, actually, now they're in Houston, right? The San Diego Rockets are in Houston. And Calvin still lives there. And in fact, Calvin taught me everything I know about basketball. And I tried to teach him everything I knew about math and physics and English. And I kept telling him, don't do this. English is not my native language. At the time, I could hardly speak the language. So Calvin, in case you're not familiar who he is, he still owns the record for the highest percentage of free throws in the NBA. So if you look at the record, you see the guy was just amazing. He could throw 100 foul shots and make all 100 of them. Through Calvin, I was able to meet some of these great players. And in fact, he would take me to Harlem, and we would play at the Rucker tournament. And when I say I would play, I played only 4 times and maybe about 2 minutes each time. But so I can brag that I actually played. But I can't play basketball. He was just very nice and very tolerant, and a lot. He actually had more optimism about my abilities than I really did. But I was able to meet some incredible people and see some things that otherwise I would have never been exposed to. And I was one of the few, very, very few white kids who could walk into Harlem and be able to, go to the Apollo and see some of the most incredible exposures. And it was through Calvin, really, that all of this started. And his friends, Willie Miller and Curtis Brown and all those. And that year, by the way, Norwalk High School not only won the high school state championship, but we finished in the top 4 of the high schools in the entire country. A tiny little school. It was amazing. So the exposure that I was given at the time not only exposed me to these future and present all-stars in the NBA, but also to some people who would otherwise have been tremendous stars, not only in the sport but also in the community, that never made it for a variety of reasons. And one of them I think I talked to you a little bit about earlier, a guy whose nickname was the Helicopter. He was maybe 5'10" in height, long arms, and he would play center. And I saw him block, Will Chamberlain and Jabbar. And this guy is 5'10". He would just jump, and he would just, had he not had so many marks in his arms and his legs from probably heroin and who knows what else, he could have easily been not only in the NBA or whatever sport he could be good at. And Helicopter, for me, is a metaphor for many young men, at the time, young men, because in those days, women were not involved in sports and not recognized like they are today. And remember, I come from the state where the basketball UConn women continually rank in the top 10 in the country, if not number 1, as I think as we speak. So there were a lot of young men with tremendous potential futures that never got out of the neighborhood, and mainly because of social problems that they were facing and issues of discrimination, whatever terms that we accept. So I was exposed to that community. So going back to New Haven or anywhere along the coast of Connecticut, it was not a difficult thing for me to be able to get to know people and be able to share with them the kind of things that led me to this project. And to get to know things that otherwise I would have not known. It was, again, Kimbrough said to me not many months ago that he remembers meeting me in the 60s. Frankly, I don't remember meeting him. So he gave me that photograph on the left. He said, "Don't you remember me?" I said, "No, I actually don't remember. I met a lot of kids." But so I asked him, "Do you play basketball?" He says, "No." So
the 60s are a blur to a lot of people.
Oh, yeah, it is. If you remember the 60s, you were not there, is what I'm told.
We have 2 tasks left. I'm handing out a little survey form that it takes like 2 minutes to complete. If you'd be so kind as to fill that out, place it on the table out front on your way out.